And also because we don't want to make it too easy for them, if we go for a big bet, they're just going to continue with the hands that they should be continuing and folding everything else. So you're almost forcing them to continue a little bit wider and putting them into a more difficult and uncomfortable spot. Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be focusing on paired boards, and we've got this question: do we bet big or do we bet small? Now, recently I've made some post-flop videos aimed to get you crushing the flop, whether you're in position or out of position. And I think that maybe there was a little bit of confusion about whether we should just always bet small on paired boards, or actually we can find some big bets in some spots as well. So I've made this video to hopefully make it a bit easier to show you what you should do on paired boards in position and out of position. So here's the plan then. What we're going to do is compare 30 big blinds low jack versus big blind to 30 big blinds low jack versus button. We're going to focus on paired boards, and then at the end of this video we're going to do a deep dive into 10 deuce deuce rainbow from both of these positions, so these spots. So low jack versus big blind to begin with, and then low jack versus button. Okay, first up then, low jack versus big blind. So we're in position here. This is a report from PioSolver, and what I've done is filter for all of the paired flops. This just comes from a 184 flop subset, and what I've done as well is sort by the highest frequency check. So you can see ace king king, jack 6-6, 10-7-7, etc. at the top, and then hands like 10-10-5, jack jack 7, jack jack 5, jack jack 4, 9-9-3, etc. towards the bottom, and they are the really high frequency bets, betting all the time. So what this is basically showing us is that on average on these paired boards in this subset, we're going to be doing 17.7% check, and the checks are mainly going to come from the spots where the pair is the bottom card. And this might suggest that the out of position player has more nut combos as a proportion of their range. It's not always the case though. You can see on 993 we still get to range bet, and I think the big blind is going to have a lot more nut combos as a proportion of their range. So it's not always the case, but you can see that the higher frequency check boards are the ones where the pair is at the bottom. So ace king king, jack 6-6. So it's that, the 6-6 and the 7-7 and the 4-4, as you can see right at the top of this chart. 81.8% small bet. You can see just in brackets what I've done is do the average frequency for the whole subset. So just to get an idea of all the different boards as well. So yeah, we go back to the start. 17.7% check, 13% on average across all the 184 flops. When it comes to small betting though, we're doing a lot more small betting on paired boards compared to the average for the subset. So the subset bets small 51.6% of the time. We're just we're doing a lot of small betting, 81.8%. You can see that it's, when we do bet, we want to be using a small size. That's what the bet 25% column is showing us. There's actually some bigger betting going on 4-4-3 and a bit on ace-ace-5 as well. But yeah, mainly just small bet in position versus the big blind. We're going to talk about why this is happening in a moment when we do the deep dive into the 10 deuce deuce board. And then finally, 0.5% big bet, on average. But the whole subset bets big 36.4% of the time. So it really shows you that on paired boards, we're really just wanting to use a small bet when we're playing in position versus the big blind. Okay, so now let's look at out of position. So low jack versus the button, exactly the same chart. This time, once again, I have sorted it by the highest frequency check. And you can see there's a lot more checking now when we're out of position. So in these paired boards, or with these paired boards, we're going to be checking 42.6% on average, and the subset checks 56.3%. So not as much checking as the average, but still a lot more checking. And if you've watched my last video on out of position c betting, then you'll know that we do a lot more checking in general anyway. So yeah, decent amount of checking here. 19% small bet and 16.8% small bet on average across the subset. And then when it comes to big betting, 38% big bet. The average for the subset is only 27.3. So we're doing a lot more big betting than average. And you can see that in the bet 56% column. That's the big bet in this sheet. And you can see just a lot more big betting on these paired boards. Finally then, there's 0.4% jam. I just wanted to include it because you can see it in the right hand column. It's just trace amounts. I think that actually on the new PioSolver, it would get rid of these jams. I think it would just put them in bet 25 or bet 56% or check, obviously. I just wanted to include it because it's on the sheet and you can see it, but I wouldn't ever recommend jamming for 28 big blinds effective on these boards. Right, so now let's take a look at the in position versus the big blind in Pio. This is on this 10 deuce deuce board, and you can see that we just do a lot of betting. You can see 93% small bet and 7% check. And when we do go for the small bet, you can see that big blind folds a whopping 64% of the time. They call 6%, raise 30%. So really aggressive check raising on paired boards. I think this is something that you will see a lot in these situations. The big blind just has a lot of deuce X here, the suited 2X here, and the offsuit 2X down here too. So they just get to check raise very, very aggressively. As you can see, 30%, not doing a lot of calling. But the big thing here is that even though we've only used a small bet, the big blind is folding a huge amount of the time. Now, we don't need to use the big bet. If we use the big bet, we're only getting them to fold a little bit more of the time because they're really just continuing with very, very similar type hands. And we just make it really easy for them to play against. We bet big, they continue with the hands they're supposed to continue with, pair or trips, and some backdoor flush draw type hands as well. But yeah, we don't want to make it too easy for our opponent. The smaller we bet, the more we force them to continue with a wider range. And that's what we want in this situation. But I mean, they're already folding 64% of the time. So that's a fantastic result for us, just being able to bet very, very small on this board. So now let's take a look at low jack versus button instead. And this time you can see the red here is a lot darker. This is the bigger bet. And so the options we've got now are bet 25%, bet 56%. We could jam, we could check as well. But you can see here on this 10 deuce deuce board, so again, this is 30 big blinds, low jack versus button. We're doing a lot of big betting. So that before I go down the big bet node, let's go down the small bet node and see how frequently the button is folding. Just 4% of the time. So small bets on this kind of board are not really going to do too much in order to help you play this hand, because your opponent is going to be continuing with a lot of hands. Now on these rainbow boards, especially on rainbow paired boards, your opponent's going to have a decent number of suited hands, and obviously 3/4 of those are going to be able to continue versus a bet because they're going to have a backdoor flush draw. Now, obviously, if we bet small, that's what's going on. You can see, I'll just hover over some of these suited hands now. You can see that the spades, diamonds, and clubs are the ones that get to continue versus the small bet. So instead, if we use this big bet, and now we have a look at some of these suited hands, you can see like King 7 with a backdoor flush draw is now going ahead and folding. King 8 folding most of the time. We really need to have, I mean, a 10 is a pair, but you can see like overcards with a backdoor flush draw. Much more preferring to continue now versus the big bet. So actually, we get a lot more folds in this situation, and I think it's really important to understand that on these paired boards that are rainbow, the imposition player is going to be able to continue very, very frequently versus a small bet, and that's why the small bet isn't really used. Okay, so just to summarize then, guys, we should be doing a lot of small betting when we're in position versus the big blind. This is mainly just because the big blind has a lot of hands that they're going to end up folding. And also because we don't want to make it too easy for them. If we go for a big bet, they're just going to continue with the hands that they should be continuing and folding everything else. So you're almost forcing them to continue a little bit wider and putting them into a more difficult and uncomfortable spot. We should do more big betting when we're out of position versus the button, especially on those paired boards that are rainbow, because the in-position player is going to have a decent number of suited hands that can continue versus a small bet. And so if we big bet, we just generate more folds. Now, I do recognize that at the start of the video, I think I said we'd do a deep dive into these two boards, and we could have definitely done that, but I think I just really wanted to touch on the most important parts of why we use small bets and big bets when it comes to playing paired boards in position and out of position. But I do think it's always important to think about lots of different things when we're thinking about theory and strategy and what we should be doing on the flop. So always be thinking about position, equities, nut combos as a proportion of range. All of these things are going to guide your strategy. So for example, when we're out of position, we just at a distinct disadvantage, a massive disadvantage, and it's very, very difficult to overcome that. But when we're in position, obviously we just have all the advantages. We get to see what happens on each street, and we get to sometimes we get to check back, for example, whereas the out of position player doesn't get to do that. They would have to block or check and see that we might choose to bet when we're in position. So when we're talking about equity, I didn't really touch on it on this video, but I have done in previous videos. When we're playing in position versus the big blind, obviously have a huge equity advantage, and that means that very often we get to bet very frequently. When we're playing out of position, so in the example today, like low jack versus button, the equities run a lot closer together. So I definitely recommend just rewinding the video, going and have a look at the chart that shows you the equities for low jack versus button, and then low jack versus big blind, and on these paired boards, and you're going to see that the equities when we're in position are much higher than when we're out of position. Then when it comes to nut combos, these paired boards, especially when you're playing against a big blind, the big blind's generally going to have a lot more nut combos because they're going to be flatting a lot of the suited hands that you're not going to be opening. And when you're playing out of position versus the button, neither player is going to have 10 deuce suited or 9 deuce suited or king deuce off, for example. So always just be thinking about how the ranges work, how the ranges interact with each other on these different types of boards. Now I recognize that I've sort of barely scratched the surface when it comes to playing paired boards in position and out of position. Hopefully you've got a lot of value from this, and you've enjoyed these tips. If you want to find out more, I do have a course, and I'll put the description down below. In the course, I go through lots of different scenarios, not just paired boards in position and out of position. We do lots of stuff versus the big blind versus the small blind. Out of position as the pre-flop raiser, we play turns. Go through turn strategy as well. So lots of things in there, looking at different types of board texture as well, paired boards, king high boards, ace x boards, monotone boards, lots of different textures as well. So if you want to find out more, definitely check out the course in the description down below. So I'm gonna wrap things up there, guys. Hope you've enjoyed this video. If you've got any comments, leave them down below. And until next time, take care, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.